This next part of the program is one that I'm really proud of, because I think of all the things that we've done in the 7 years with the FinTech Society, the first white paper we did may have gotten more publicity and use than anything else we've ever done, and especially bringing light to the concentration of the payment industry in the city of Atlanta. You've heard a number of folks rattle off, and we've seen it in the Wall Street Journal, and we hear it on the radio, about the 70% of the credit card volume globally touching a company headquartered in the state of Georgia. That came as an output from the first white paper we did. And two guys who have been longtime members and extraordinary contributors to the TAG FinTech Society, Glen Sarvady and Don Campbell, undertook updating that white paper and creating a new one. And so today we're actually happy to announce the unveiling of the latest white paper, which I hope will really give us more fuel to continue to grow our hub here. So without further ado, I want to bring Don and Glen on stage and let them tell you what we found. Thanks, guys. Good luck, guys.
Thanks.
All right, these lights are bright. So you should have copies of the white paper on the tables. There are about 10 placed per table, so you can take a look at what we've done. As Sean said, we started off this exercise in 2012, published the first one in 2013. And then Glenn and I decided about probably 9 months ago that we would tackle the update of that. And I have no clue how many hours we have in this, but I don't know, do you know?
My wife made a comment. My wife and daughters, if you ask them, I think it's kind of a personality defect that we're just obsessed with FinTech. And I mean, it's hopefully that obsession actually turned us into a pretty good final product that'll be useful to people, because it was definitely a labor of love. It's a good amount of work from a bunch of people on this.
You know, we started off with this concept of defining the ecosystem. Everyone wants to define an ecosystem to say, you know, how big a bread box does it fit into? And, you know, so based on the findings, you know, it's either going to be viewed as like a mothership, you know, the place that everyone kind of needs to come, or the Death Star. So which is it?
Well, I think clearly if it was the Death Star, we wouldn't be up here. But you know, one of the things that we took a look at, and you've heard some of these numbers earlier today, the slide's up there now. You know, the last time we did this, we estimated that there were 70 FinTech companies in the Georgia FinTech ecosystem. We conservatively estimate now that it's 100. That 30,000 number's been used a couple times already from the stage during the day. We've taken, again, a pretty conservative view in terms of the way we've calculated that. For example, none of the banks, you know, you've definitely got innovation centers and IT shops within the banks that would qualify as FinTech. Professional services firms are not in there. I mention that because sometimes you do see some different numbers. I believe the ATPC's numbers are a little bit broader. They have a slightly different definition. I think they're a little bit north of that. But we feel very confident that there's at least 30,000, which is a pretty darn impressive number.
Absolutely. You know, to get a lot of these numbers, we partner with Georgia Tech. Sudhir Shava, is he?
I believe he's back
in
the corner over there. He's waving. Thank you, Sudhir.
He's in the back somewhere. If you haven't met him, take a chance to do that, because he's really looking very deeply from Georgia Tech's perspective into the FinTech market. And we did a lot of interviews, sat down with the executives one-on-one to talk about things like innovation, things like government you know, regulation and the like. And one of the key things that we learned was that in that concept of the mothership, if you don't engage with Georgia, you know, you're not on the map.
And this is the last quote on here, and I've got the lights in my eye, but I believe Marianne Johnson from First Data is right out there. And this was something, we've got a series of quotes that we took away from about 24, roughly 24 executive interviews we did with key leaders in the industry. And those quotes, some of those really key takeaways are peppered throughout the report. And this one just really stuck with me. And thank you, Marianne, for sharing it. And I'm verified she was comfortable with having it attributed to her before we got up here. But this was one of my favorite ones. If you don't engage with Georgia, you're going to hit a wall in the last mile of execution. And when you think about all the disruptors going on in the world and getting into the fintech space, and we've talked about several of them today, you can do a lot with an app and consumer-facing experience and things like that. But at the end of the day, there's still a payment that has to take place. And virtually every one of those apps to this day is still riding on existing payment rails. So at some point, you've actually got to make that last connection so you can execute those transactions. Think about Uber, for instance. If you didn't actually have that last piece that said at the end of the cab ride, you get out and the payment's taken care of, the experience wouldn't be nearly as good. That's the last mile we're talking about there. And I think that's really key to what we've got. We've got the innovation going on here, but we have those really bellwether companies that really drive a lot of the process.
So one of the areas that we wanted to talk to the executives about is saying, everyone says that all the innovation is being done in Silicon Valley or Austin or some other place. What is your take on that? And is innovation being done here? And this is the statements that came back. But what we wanted to do was to validate that, innovation doesn't necessarily mean it's small and incubated and very highly entrepreneurial. It can also mean the risk that the very large organizations here, the payment processors, who take these things to market around the globe, that's where the risk is, because the greatest revenue loss is potentially there. So the executives, we'll talk about venture capital, for example.
Yeah, we talked, it was interesting to me when we actually tried to get the input from these executives on a series of different topics, and you'll see this, the reports are now on the tables out there. The place that I'd say we had the most divergence of opinion, where I didn't really see a consensus, was in the area of venture capital. You do hear people say, we don't have enough venture capital in town. Some people say it's not enough early stage. Some people say it's not enough late stage. Other people have come back and said, you know what, a good idea is going to be funded. Others have said you don't need to get the venture capital in the town that you work in. So it was kind of all over the map. But the bottom line, I think, was that people said, if a good idea exists, you're going to have to be engaging with Georgia and venture capital, and it does exist here. And we know that there's new funds being started. TTV Capital's obviously been very involved in the payment space here in the state. So it really is not an impediment, but it's getting even more readily available as well.
And we talked to one banking executive who said, we asked the question about, are there any VCs? And he said, well, you should come by here sometime and see the steady stream of venture capitalists who are coming through my office to ask me questions about what's going on. So while they may not be here physically, certainly they're reaching out to understand the marketplace.
Actually, I just went ahead to the slide that we were talking about. That we kind of touched on a few of those things. That first one in the top left corner, there's innovations that come from small companies, and the ones that people really talk about tend to be the ones that are consumer facing. Those are the ones that get the press. Innovations that actually speed up the process behind the scenes are every bit as important, and that's a lot of probably what we see here. They don't get the headlines, but again, they're essential innovations. And some of those take place in large companies, some of them take place in startups, others are small companies that get acquired and brought into these larger firms.
So one of the things we did in our research was we partnered with Georgia Tech. In addition to analyzing the statistics, we had a great young intern from Georgia Tech from Sudhir's organization and took all the publicly held companies and kind of tore them down. When you look at the statistics in the report, you're going to find that maybe they seem a little bit smaller. For example, is there 30,000 or more employees? It's hard to say because the organizations generally don't break down how many employees they have in Georgia as opposed to Arkansas as opposed to New York. So some of those numbers are difficult to come up with. But so talk about the speed of the transaction and the platforms that exist here to run that speed. Lower left. Oh, don't go.
Which one are you referring to here?
Yeah, the lower left one. Nope.
I'll get there.
Go back to the quotes.
There we go. And the key here, again, in terms of one of the quotes, and again, I can't see, but Joe Kleinwachter had a couple of very good quotes for a Chief Innovation Officer at WorldPay. And speed in the financial chain, and the key here is speed with trust. You put those two together, and we've, a lot of security obviously is, paramount in the minds of a lot of people. That to us is the winning equation, and we heard that from several people, but I think Joe enunciated it best. If you can get speed and trust together in the equation, that's a pretty powerful winning play.
So at the end of the day, if we were to do a State of the Union of the ecosystem, we would say, and if you spoke to Wayne Johnson at Raymond James, who also participated in this research study, so we had a great source of data. And what he'd say is, operating profits, good. Growth year over year, good. We're talking publicly held companies now. And there's nothing that, from his perspective, that he can see that is inherently wrong with the environment. So remember that we started Tag FinTech to say, let's take advantage and communicate to the world who we are and what we have here. And that's the effort that Glen and I have been working on, these ecosystem white papers, to do that. And the message is good. As Sean said earlier, the original document was much quoted throughout the industry. This document has much better research and much better, I think, results from it.
We took a broader, more ambitious approach, is what I'd say. Is what we really wanted to do is really tap into the culture of innovation that's existing here in Atlanta and in the Georgia space. And again, as you see from this slide, we did, as we said, talk to about 24 executives. We also have, and hopefully several of you have participated in the online survey that we conducted last fall. And that data is also populating the overall report. And then, as you said, the interns work around Raymond James. I think we've got a really good combination of qualitative and quantitative data that I think paints a very compelling picture of our space.
And, so as Sean said, we do a lot of our own independent research. A couple of years ago, I did something on the whole big data area, and that was in 2014. And what we basically found was there's not a lot going on in big data in the big, transaction processing groups here. But they all promised by 2020 that there would be. This year, in the middle to the end of 2016, we're going to come back, interview again, and every 2 years we're going to measure the progress that's being made in the area of big data. I think our time is up.
Yeah, just a couple of quick things. We could talk about this for a lot longer, and we actually plan to, because we're going to do a lunch and learn on this topic in late May. There's a mention of it in the agenda. So if you're interested in understanding more, Trevor Williams is here from Global Atlanta. They've done a similar, I see him waving there. They've done a similar report that actually covers a lot of the legacy and looks back historically on how we got to where we are today. I think the two reports complement each other quite nicely. He's going to be speaking on a panel at that lunch as well. We'll get into a lot more detail there. The URL is there, but you'll find it if you go to our site. The PDF is available for download, and please get the word out. And obviously, the rising tide lifts all boats. Make sure it gets circulated through your organizations, and we're happy to answer any questions.
And many, many thanks to the sponsors that you see up on the screen right now, who all provided both a combination of funding as well as access to their executives to do these interviews. Hope you enjoy the white paper.
Thank you.